Welcome back to Guru Talk. I'm Dave Palumbo, and today I'm joined by Trevor Kouritzin, and we're going to be talking about SARMs, selective androgen receptor modulators. It sounds like a mouthful. It seems like this is like the new crazy thing that everyone's into right now because I think they're more readily available. And I think a lot of people don't really know much about SARMs, so I'm bringing Trevor on. The man that Dr. Tony Hughes just called the Canadian Chemist. Do you like that nickname?
I don't know what it is, but people think that I'm Canadian is so funny. Like when I'm in Sacramento, everyone goes, "Hey, this is Canadian Trevor. This is Canadian Trevor."
Where did you get that from? I don't know where you picked that one up.
Everywhere he goes is don't mind him. He's French Canadian.
All right, let's talk about SARMs because obviously they've been around for quite a while, but it seems like people have been using them more and more as anabolic steroids have been less available and maybe less reliably available, I think, because there's so many fakes out there nowadays.
So the reason I want to come on, Dave, is that there's so much misinformation about SARMs, right? Like you'll hear one person say SARMs are going to add 5 inches to your penis, and the next person's going to say they don't work at all, right? So I just want to kind of come on and clarify what these drugs actually are. So SARM stands for selective androgen receptor modulator. So these were developed because if you think about steroids have huge clinical applications, right? If someone had a muscle wasting disease, let's say HIV or cancer, if you gave that person anabolic steroids would increase muscle protein synthesis, prevent muscle catabolism. That would improve quality of life, that would improve functionality. That would be, revolutionary for someone who has a muscle wasting disease. The problem is that steroids aren't selective in their actions. They also affect your prostate, your liver, and your kidney. And then also the androgenic properties you wouldn't want to give to a woman because she would get emasculating side effects. Right. So basically, SARMs were developed is, can we make a drug that will bind to the androgen receptor just like steroids will, but it's selective in its action, so it won't affect your liver, your kidney, or prostate. So that's basically why SARMs are developed. Now,
there's different classes of them. And as far as I know, at least in the United States, there's no drug, I guess you could say, approvals on any of these. They're all overseas. Most of them are experimental. And I think that's why they're available here through what we would call a gray market, because they haven't been classified as actual drugs yet and sold. Is there any reason that you've done through your research to figure out why the United States has not, turned any of these into actual prescription drugs that they're prescribing to people? Is there side effects that we don't know about?
So right now they're in clinical trials. So how clinical trials work is first you do animal models, you make sure it's safe in animal models, then you do some human studies, and then you can lobby to the FDA to get it patented as a pharmaceutical. So I believe in the next 10 years, these drugs probably will be available as pharmaceuticals, but right now they're still in the early stages of human clinical trials. So, like something like Andrin, S4, for example, there hasn't been any human clinical studies on it yet. There's only been animal studies. The most studied SARM is Ostermin, and that has about 3 human clinical studies on it. So I would suspect once they have about 5 human clinical studies that show this is effective, there's no side effects, then they could lobby to the FDA and try to get it patented as a pharmaceutical.
And what are the studies showing? In your research, what has the studies revealed about Osterine in terms of benefits and negatives?
So again, this is a really important point to make, is that if you look at these studies, they're looking for these as a therapeutic drug, right? They're not looking at them in terms of muscle building the way a bodybuilder, right? So giving them low doses of Osterine, most of the clinical studies are only giving them 1 milligram per day. They're seeing small increases in lean body mass. So one clinical study showed 1.8 kilograms, so that's roughly about 3.5 pounds, an increase in lean body mass in 16 weeks. So not significant, but that was from 1 milligram per day.
Are these people that they're giving them to, are they being told to work out at all, or is this just with no training?
No training, and most of them are in seniors, which are not a population that's not likely to build muscle. So the fact you're giving, an elderly person this drug and they're gaining 3.5 pounds of lean body mass is pretty significant when you really think about it.
Yeah, especially since they're not weight training.
Exactly, and they're not weight training, and there's no dietary adherence, right? You know, old people, they eat
Sugar.
toast with jam, right? It's
Yeah.
not like they're eating chicken breast and chugging.
Although my father, when he got older, he was eating crap, but he was drinking, for some reason, he thought that Boost, which is like one of those Ensure, like Ensure Boost. It's like one of those high protein drinks where they claim are high protein. It's basically just skim milk and water. He was drinking like 8 of those a day. I don't know what he was doing. He thought he was like on some kind of Olympia diet or something like that. So my dad was probably consuming more protein than any other senior in the place he was living at, the assisted living place.
Have you ever drank one, Dave?
What? They taste like Yoo-Hoos. Of course, they taste great, but at least there's protein in there,
Well, I think the first ingredient or the second ingredient is high fructose corn syrup.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's horrible for you. It's terrible, and they're expensive too. That's the funny thing. They're really expensive. It's not cheap, and especially if you drink 8 of them a day. My father thought he was like having like milkshakes, and I think he thought in his mind that this was going to keep him alive, or either that or he just liked the way they tasted, probably more than likely than not. But anyway, so let's get back to SARMs for a minute. What's the newest SARM on the market?
The newest SARMs are S23 and YK11. Okay. Both of those I would actually categorize as designer steroids because they're extremely suppressive, and YK11 is methylated. So those SARMs, like the beauty of SARMs is the fact that they're minimally suppressive, right? I would say Austrian is like maybe 5% suppressive.
Why? Hold on, let me stop you a second. Why would they be suppressive at all if they have if they're not, they're not steroidal in nature?
They are steroidal. They bind to the androgen receptor just like steroids do.
They bind to the receptor, but they're non-steroidal. That's why they created these. They're not steroids. They're selective androgen receptor modulators. They're not steroidal.
It's true, but because they bind to the androgen receptor and they do have anabolic properties, they will still affect your HBTA. And basically what happened is, it's like anything in life, is that you want to push the envelope. So Austrian is very mild. They got good results from Austrian. They're like, hey, can we make a stronger drug? So then they made LGD and S4. And they're like, hey, can we push the envelope even further? And then that's when they made S23. And then they pushed the envelope even further and they made a methylated compound, which is YK11. Because the problem with anything that's not methylated is, the oral absorbability isn't great. Now, what I would love to see as an academic researcher, it's never been studied, but injectable SARMs. Mm-hmm. Because if you could make an injectable version of, let's say, Austrian or LGD or anything like that, I really think this would revolutionize muscle building because it would be much more, there are basically no side effects, right? Because it doesn't affect your liver, your prostate, your kidney. Because the problem with SARMs...
it's got to affect the liver. Because the liver is still breaking it down. It might not be as toxic as, say, an oral compound would be, but if you're injecting something, it still has to be broken down. So the liver is always going to have some stress on it. Let's face it. Any drug.
100%, right? I mean, in the clinical research, there was no effect on liver enzymes, but again, they're using a dosage way lower than body
very low dose.
Yeah. So you'd have to extrapolate that and do your own research. But I would love to see, maybe this is an experiment for Tony Hughes is really, test injectable SARMs because I think that would be really, really exciting. It's kind of like if anyone's ever used injectable Anavar or something like that, they would explain, they would notice that it's so much better than the oral form because the oral form of anything isn't absorbed that great, even if it's methylated.
Right, but isn't injectable Anavar just powdered sterile Anavar, which still has the 17-alpha alkylation in it?
It is still methylated and everything.
Yeah.
It's just whenever you take anything orally, it's not absorbed as well, versus injecting it straight into your bloodstream.
Right, of course.
That goes for anything, whether it be vitamins, whether it be drugs, and that's why someone will have taken glutathione, pills and not really notice anything from it, and then they'll go to like some anti-aging clinic and they'll get like a glutathione injection and they'll be like, holy crap, I feel like $1 million.
Yeah, well, because glutathione is not orally absorbable, and that's why the injectable form. I use the injectable form almost every day. I love it. I feel great on it, and I think it's a terrific substance. Now let's go back to SARMs for a minute. So, just to reiterate, the thing that suppresses the pituitary function is usually estrogen. Now, SARMs don't convert to estrogen, so that's not an issue, obviously. They don't convert to DHT, so we don't have to worry about the prostate, hair loss, acne, that kind of stuff. on paper, they sound ideal, obviously, but they don't have nearly, well, at least it seems like to me, and the observations I've made over the years, that they're not even close strength-wise to anabolic steroids. Why is that?
Okay, great question. And I love that you said that, because I don't want people to get the false impression that I'm saying SARMs are as strong as steroids. Kind of view SARMs as like steroids' younger little brother. So there's a couple of reasons why.
It's a gateway drug to steroids.
so if you really quantify steroids have two properties: the anabolic and the androgenic properties, right? Anabolic is primarily to build muscle. Androgenic is primarily an increase in male sexual characteristics. So that's increasing aggression, increasing strength, and things like that. Now, on paper, you only need the anabolic properties to build muscle, but we know that doesn't work in the real world sense. If you add in a little bit of androgen, whether it be testosterone or anything like that, you just build muscle so much more efficiently. Anyone who's ran, just anabolic, let's say they just ran Anavar and EQ, they'll notice that their physique gets really, really hard, but they don't really gain any muscle. But then they add in a little bit of testosterone or a little bit of an androgen kick, and they start putting on muscle. So one caveat of SARMs that they don't have any androgenic properties. Another big caveat is that they don't aromatize into estrogen. And some estrogen is needed to build muscle at the most efficient rate because it sensitizes the androgen receptor. So if someone was listening to this and they said like, hey, I want to build muscle in the safest way possible, I would tell them to use SARMs, but I would add in a small dose of testosterone just so you get that aromatization and just so you get that androgen kick.
Yeah, but most people who, if you're a male at least, or if you're female, you're going to have estrogen in your body anyway because your natural testosterone will aromatize. And if you're a woman, obviously you have estrogen just because they're produced from the ovaries. So I don't think that's necessarily a problem. I think, to me, the way I view SARMs, and it might be my own viewpoint, is that it's kind of a gateway, substance to steroids. You're not ready to use steroids. You use SARMs. There's less side effects. Yeah, you're not going to grow as much as steroids, but the muscle you're going to gain, even though it might be small amounts, is going to be solid muscle, and you're not going to really notice any negatives. Once you feel comfortable using the SARMs, however, you're ready to go to the next step where you're going to accept that there's going to be side effects. There's going to be pituitary suppression. There might be some hair loss and acne. There might be, some aggression. All the side effects that we see with steroids, that you're going to get, possible liver stress, kidney, function elevation if your blood pressure is going up. These SARMs don't seem to have the side effects that the steroids do, but they don't seem to be as effective. So it depends on where you're at on what you want to accomplish. To me, it would seem like a track athlete or something like that would probably do better with like a SARM than say, an anabolic steroids, where a bodybuilder that wants to maximize size and strength in the gym would probably do much better with anabolic steroids.
I agree with that. The main people who are using SARMs are people who want strength, but also functionality, right? So if you look at people who are really buying SARMs, it's, MMA athletes, it's hockey players, football players, people who want strength, but they don't want big, bulky muscles. But for a bodybuilder, one thing, the way my brain works is I'm always looking at the most efficient ways to do things. And one mistake I see people make is that they just focus on steroids, right? It's like, what's the best steroid cycle I could make? But you would build muscle more efficiently if you used less steroids, then also add in some growth hormone, some insulin, some SARMs, some over-the-counter stuff like creatine, arachidonic acid, amino acids. Like that's just kind of how my brain works. Right. So for even the steroid user, I think if you used a little bit less steroids and then added in, maybe some LGD or some Ostrin, that would help with recovery because Ostrin really helps with your joints and tendons and ligaments. And then also that would help you use less anabolics to circumvent some of the side effects. So what I would say is, maybe play around. Maybe if normally you run 500 tests and 500 EQ, maybe try 300 and some SARMs, and then see if you're getting building muscle at the same rate, but you have less side effects. Right. Or for someone who maybe is a big guy who suffers from high blood pressure, maybe lower your steroid dosage and use SARMs. Or maybe in the off season, if you want to give your body a bit of a break, run some SARMs, and then for your pre-contest cycle, go ape shit with the Tren and the Winstrol and all that stuff, which is going to wreak havoc on your organs.
I wonder, my bewilderment, because I'm not obviously competing anymore and I'm not taking drugs anymore, so SARMs kind of came after, I stopped competing. My I guess speculation is that if you're taking anabolic steroids and you're taking SARMs, are they competing for the same receptor sites? And if so, are steroids more potent at binding those receptor sites? And are the SARMs even doing anything while you're taking the anabolics? Or are these SARMs preventing the anabolics from being as effective because they're occupying these androgenic, these anabolic receptor sites in the nucleus? That's what I would be curious. I don't think anyone's done any studies on this. I don't even know how you do the studies on it, but that's what worries me. In other words, if you know that the SARMs are not as effective as anabolics, are they inhibiting the anabolics from working? Or are they adding to it? And if they are adding to it, how are they adding to it? Because it seems like they're all going for the same receptor sites.
Great question, Dave. And that's something that I've thought about a lot, because if you look at the literature, SARMs actually have a higher binding affinity to the androgen receptor than steroids. So like you said, what would scare me is, like, let's say you're using a lot of SARMs and they have a higher binding affinity. That would lead more testosterone in your bloodstream to possibly aromatize into estrogen or DHT or things you don't want. But if you look at the real world picture, I mean, you have so many androgen receptors, right? So unless you're using like grams of gear, I don't think it would be an issue. But this is just my personal hypothesis, right? This is something that's never been studied and realistically probably won't ever be studied. I just can't see a clinical trial studying something like
right,
this.
But think about it. If you have unlimited amounts of androgen receptors, then theoretically, the more SARMs you take, the bigger you should grow. But that doesn't happen. There's a ceiling, a plateauing effect. So there is a saturation level, we know, with SARMs, just like there is with anabolics. So if you're at the saturation level, which most bodybuilders are because they want to take the most effective dosages, right, then there could be some inhibition there if they are competing for the same receptor sites. And I don't really know enough. I almost failed organic chemistry. I don't know that. I wasn't that good at how receptor sites work and everything like that. So, and that's probably even a molecular biologist would deal with that. How these compounds bind to these receptors, and are there different angles on the receptor that these compounds can bind to, or is it just one receptor site that fits one molecule? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but it's interesting to speculate, of course.
So in my opinion, the rate limiting factor of muscle growth is not the actual anabolics. I think it's food, I think it's sleep, and I also think it's myostatin. Because when you increase the amount of anabolics in your body, your body increases myostatin as a defense mechanism, right? Because the human body does not want to be overly muscular.
Sure.
From a survival aspect, right? We want to be strong, but also lean and athletic. We want to be able to kill like a woolly mammoth. So if there was there's nothing on the market right now. I know I'm going to get a million questions after this.
I agree with you, by the way. Go ahead.
But if there was something that would inhibit myostatin, you would basically get rid of the rate limiting factor, assuming you could eat enough. And then the rate limiting factor would be food. And I mean, you can only consume so much food, but I really don't think the rate limiting factor is anabolics. I think it's other factors, because anabolics are just one part of muscle growth, right? And that's why if you ever look at like a natural bodybuilder who is doing, like a pre-contest diet and their testosterone is in the shitters, they still have a decent amount of muscle, even though their testosterone is way below the normal range. And I remember that because I actually have a pro card in natural bodybuilding. I won that a couple of years ago. I did a physical right after my show, and my testosterone was like 100. Like, it was terrible. but if you're a natural guy and you're eating zero fat and you're doing 2 hours of cardio,
right,
your testosterone's gonna be zero, right? It'll bounce back eventually. But people are always like testosterone, but testosterone is just one hormone in the body, right? There's muscle building is way more complicated than just testosterone.
Right. No, you're right in that sense. I mean, but we don't have a way to inhibit myostatin. I think that how we modulate myostatin in the future, whether it be via a drug that they create to do that, and supposedly they're in testing on that too. I don't know where that's at. I don't even know where I would look that up. And then also obviously gene therapy to possibly permanently, suppress myostatin, release in the body. Although, you start messing with genes in the body, obviously other problems, can rear their ugly heads. But I think that you're right. I think that the future of muscle building in terms of going beyond what we are now, I don't think SARMs are going to take it to the next level. I think SARMs is like adding classic physique to bodybuilding. You got the main bodybuilders, you had your natural supplements, which I call men's physique, and then you got classic. SARMs is kind of like classic bodybuilding. If we want to go to something beyond open bodybuilding, we got to find another category, right? We got to find another drug that's going to enable you to take us there. It's not SARMs. It could be gene therapy. It could be somehow, the alteration of myostatin, or maybe another molecule we might find down the road, so to speak, that we haven't even discovered yet. I mean, myostatin's pretty new, right? No one really knew that was around until we saw these Belgian blue cows that were myostatin negative, all of a sudden growing enormous amounts of muscle, uncontrollably. So to me, that's where the future is, myostatin, inhibition.
What scares me about myostatin, though, Dave, is that in order to find a myostatin inhibitor that wouldn't kill you, it would have to be selective in its actions. Because when people think muscle, you think your skeletal muscle, like your pecs and your biceps, but then you also have your cardiac muscles, like your heart. And that's why all those cows that were given that myostatin drug, they all died of heart attacks. So even if we found a myostatin inhibitor that worked, you'd probably die in 10 years of a heart attack.
You think so, though? Because Flex Wheeler supposedly has no myostatin, according to the, Victor Conte tested a whole bunch of pro bodybuilders back in the late 90s, and supposedly Flex Wheeler had no myostatin. They had that myostatin baby that was born about 10 years ago. I think the kid is doing pretty good. He was super hypermuscular, if you remember him, from birth. So I don't think it affects cardiac muscle. However, who knows? I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if I would want to alter my genetics gene-wise to test that theory out, but it doesn't appear that the Belgian blues, not the ones that they've given drugs, I'm talking about the ones that are just genetically have no myostatin. They're just super hypermuscular cows. They don't seem to have any health problems that I know of, at least.
I don't know. I mean, you really have to look at the genetics and also the epigenetics of those animals. But, with someone like Flex Wheeler, because he didn't die as an infant, I think that, that myostatin gene was probably only missing in his skeletal muscle and not his cardiac muscle. Because if you think about your heart, that your heart can enlarge, and that your heart is a muscle just like the rest of your muscles in your body.
Right, but so is the smooth muscle of your intestines, but they don't seem to grow in response to steroids.
It's hard to say, Dave. I mean, think about all the bubble guts we're seeing. I mean, I think a part of that is your intestines growing, the smooth muscle in there.
I think what happens is they hypertrophy from all the food people are eating. In other words, when you put an enormous stretch on the intestinal tract, those muscles, that stretch causes them to hypertrophy and enlarge. So they can enable more food to enter them comfortably. And, I felt that happened with me. I was eating 12 times a day. I mean, my stomach was big in the off season especially. And I noticed after I stopped bodybuilding and I cut my food intake back quite a bit, everything went down. So like a normal muscle, it atrophied. So I think it was more the stretch response than it was the actual drugs themselves that do that. I think people think that the steroids or GH makes your internal organs get bigger. I found that wasn't the case. I always wondered that about myself, and then I got scans later in life and everything's the right size, aside from my heart being a little enlarged just from being athletic. I don't know. It's hard to say if, being an athlete is what enlarges your heart or if the steroids help, which I'm sure they probably do to a certain degree. But I don't know if removing myostatin would actually do necessarily. You know what it might do? If you remove myostatin and your heart gets bigger because you're an athlete on steroids, it might enable it to get bigger than it should because of that. But I think that myostatin really inhibits mostly skeletal muscle growth is really what it's designed to block. Now, I know that they sell on these peptide websites myostatin inhibitors like follistatin. Those things just don't work. People don't realize that. And then you always get the report, oh, my friend in Europe has the real myostatin inhibitors. They're like $5,000. Do you have any money you want to send me? And I just always tell people just avoid that. That's the biggest scam of all time.
Only Big Ramy has the hookup. So
yeah, right. Yeah, back in my day, everyone was like Dorian's on IGF-1. That was like the big, that was like the mystical drug then. Now it's myostatin. Now, back then it was IGF-1. Oh, Dorian's taking IGF-1. That's why he's so big. And we were all like, oh, we got to get IGF-1. So you know how it goes. They're always finding an excuse for the biggest guy out there. What he must be taking something that no one else is taking, right?
You want to know what my theory is on the extended guts?
What?
So human growth hormone is 191 AA recombinant human growth hormone, right?
Yeah.
For whatever reason, it's way cheaper to make rat human growth hormone, 192 AA recombinant growth hormone. So a lot of these underground labs in China, which people are buying, their kits from, are actually selling you rat recombinant HGH instead of human recombinant HGH. Mm-hmm. Now, if you look at the anatomy of a rat, they have a way larger abdominal than humans. So my personal theory is that because a lot of these people are injecting rat recombinant HGH in their body, they're still getting the same effects of HGH because our DNA is like 99.9% identical to rats. But that small difference in the human anatomy, I think, is actually causing their waist to enlarge. Again,
I disagree with that because the initial GH that came out in this country from Genentech was 192 amino acid. And then that was from Genentech. And then Eli Lilly wanted to make GH, but they couldn't because Genentech had the patent. So they went and did some research. They found out that they made a mistake, Genentech, and that it was actually 191 amino acids. I used the 192s initially because they were more readily available. I think they didn't work as well because I think what happened is you built up antibodies to these because it wasn't the exact sequence of the ones that our bodies were naturally producing. When the 191 came out, they found that was human, that was the right sequence, and now that all of them changed to 191. I doubt that they're making 192 in China, which wouldn't make any sense. I don't think it would be any more expensive to make 191 than it would be to make 192. And for sure, if anything, the 192 would work less potently. I don't think it would cause abdominal distension. I think you just wouldn't respond to it because your immune system would maybe recognize it as a foreign body and would just stop responding to it. So that's my take on the whole thing. But I just think it's excessive use of anything causes side effects. And that's really that's the history of our sport. Don't do things in excess and you won't have negative side effects. We live in a sport of excesses, and so we're always looking for the next greatest thing. And once we find the next greatest thing, you find out the right dose, and then people say, well, if that guy's doing X amount, I'll do 10X, and that's, everyone wants to keep pushing the boundaries of what they could possibly do. I mean, if you would have told me that guys were going to inject 10,000 milligrams a week of testosterone back in the 90s, I would have said, no, you're out of your mind. No one in their right mind would do that. But there's guys today doing it. So, it is what it is. Is it better? No, of course. We know that more is not better, but that's just the way it is. But it'll be interesting to see where SARMs go and if they actually develop stronger SARMs. It's like, how they first came out with the electric car? No one wanted to ride them because they had the battery didn't last long. They didn't have a lot of horsepower. Now they're coming out with high performance electric cars that are rivaling some of these, Ferraris out there. So who knows? Maybe SARMs will come up to speed and they'll have the strength of an anabolic steroid with no side effects. It's possible,
It's definitely an exciting area of research. One thing I want to say, just for anyone who's looking to purchase SARMs, is that SARMs can legally be sold as a research chemical liquid. Now, you listening are probably thinking, okay, jackpot, I can legally buy these things. The problem is that as soon as that company puts for research purposes only on the label, it's not regulated by FDA. So they can literally put anything they want in that product and legally sell it. They could literally piss in that bottle, sell it, and it's legal. So do your research. These people in China are shysters. They will send you literally rat piss. So do your research. Unfortunately, there's not a home steroid testing kit like Roy Test or anything that can test SARMs. I hopefully there'll be something in the future. What I would do is, what I suspect is that if someone is going to sell you fake SARMs, they're probably going to sell you a cheap oral steroid like D-bol because they want you to feel it, right? So what they're probably going to do is instead of sending you like Osterin or LGD or S4, they're probably going to sell you like D-bol or Anadrol, something where you're going to take it and after a week you're like, holy crap, this stuff is awesome, and you're going to keep buying it. So what I would do is I would run the SARM for a week and get blood work done. And if your liver enzymes are elevated, you don't have SARMs. You have some sort of oral steroid
or run Roy Test on it and see what it comes. If it comes back as reading positive for one of the anabolics, then you probably got scammed. I heard also that at least 50% of the SARMs out there is actually just Nolvadex or tamoxifen. Have you heard that?
Well, SARMs are very, very similar to selective estrogen receptor modulators. Like the molecules are very similar.
Yeah.
So they might just fake it with that, because then if you did like a melting point that was just very crude, like let's say you did a melting point in like your kitchen oven or whatever, it would have roughly the same melting point. So they might be faking it with it. I don't know, man. Like those people in China are always thinking of some way to fake their stuff.
You would think that they would want to send the real stuff so that people kept buying it from them, rather than them sending shit over here and then people saying what a bunch of crap that they're sending over here. Because what will happen is China will be replaced by another country that will start producing all this stuff, like Russia or something like that. And China will basically screw themselves out of all this business. It doesn't make sense to me. They have labor over there that they gets paid 2 cents an hour. So the cost of the drugs is probably negligible. It's the workforce that's putting together all this stuff. So I just don't get the whole thing. To me, I'm so happy I'm not competing in this environment, because it's very scary. And that's why I sell those Roy test kits. I sell the growth hormone testing kit on DavePalumbo.com. And pretty soon we're going to have a clenbuterol testing kit as well, because I don't trust anything. I wouldn't trust anything. If I was a bodybuilder nowadays, I'd be so paranoid about everything I took, because you just don't know. There's no real stuff anymore. Everything is underground.
You know what I think it is, Dave? Is I think that China kind of knows that they're the only one who can do this, because if I contacted a manufacturing facility in the United States and said, hey, I want to buy some research chemical SARMs, they would say, what university are you with?
Right.
So, you know what I mean? And like same thing with anything above ground in Russia or Europe. They just can't do it. But in China, they don't give a crap. So they know this is illegal, but they're like, whatever. So I think they kind of just know that we're the only place that's willing to do something illegal and has the equipment to manufacture these things.
Right. You're probably right. Well, Trevor, I want to just thank you for stopping by and having this little discussion with me. I know people love these little guru talks where they can kind of weigh all the different, benefits and I guess negatives of all these drugs and understand the science of what's going on. So thanks again, and appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, so just last thing is that I'm writing a 150-page ebook that is just talking about science. So it's no bro science. It's literally, this is what the research says. These are what these drugs are. That's going to be available for free at SARMsbook.com.
Okay.
And also anabolictv.com. Me, Tony Huge, Coach Trevor, we all have our videos up there. And both websites are completely free. The nice thing about Enhanced Athlete is it's all about research. So we obviously sell supplements, but you know how Tony is. He loves this stuff, and he's all for, educating the masses. So
we love Tony. I'm glad you guys are over there working together. And once again, we'll have you back for another topic probably next month or something. All right?
Okay. Pleasure, Dave. Thank you
so
much.
All right, guys, that's going to take us to the end of Guru Talk. I want to thank Trevor Kouritzin for joining us. I'm Dave Palumbo. We'll see you next time.